Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective, and this week we're talking about casting circles. This week's topic comes from Shawn. It will be in the description of the video as always, but it was simply casting a circle would be a cool topic to see talk about. Or really it said casting a circle would be a cool thing to see. So first thing I want to say for my video in particular, I can't speak for anyone else on the channel who's going to be making videos on this topic this week, but for this video in particular, I will not be demonstrating how to cast a circle or even how I cast a circle, because there are many ways to do it. I will not be casting a circle for you and recording it, basically, so that you can watch me do it. So if that is what you were hoping to see in this video and you're not interested in just hearing me talk about it, then feel free to check out another video this week. That's not what I'm going to be doing. That is one of the things in my practice that, and in my practice as a YouTube content creator as well, we could call that a practice somewhat as well. That is one thing that I do not like to do. I don't like to record myself doing ritual or doing magic. It just doesn't feel like something that I should share in that way. That does not mean that I believe no one should do it. In fact, many people do feel comfortable doing that, and you can absolutely find those videos elsewhere on YouTube. But for me personally, that's not something I like to do in videos. I will talk about the concept. I will describe to you verbally in detail how I do it, but I do not like to simply get up and do it and record it, if that makes sense. I do make a distinction there. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about casting a circle. Where to even begin? I learned initially how to cast circle from reading books. There are many books that outline how to do it, that even give you ritual scripts to follow. And so that is definitely how I started, was by reading about what casting a circle is about, what it's for, and then reading the scripts, following the scripts, and then changing it slightly as I got comfortable with it and actually tried it out, changing things slightly to fit what I wanted to do or what I felt worked for me. So maybe first I should say, I do cast circle in my practice. That might not be something that is common to everyone on the channel. Certainly not something that is common to every witch or every pagan or every neo-pagan, but I do cast circle in my practice. I cast circle before ritual, and whether I cast circle before doing other types of magic, if I'm not doing them within the context of a full ritual, is kind of 50-50. I might cast a circle before I do a spell. It'll be a very simple and quick one. I don't necessarily do the full thing. I certainly don't do the full, like, walking around the space 3 times and then doing all of the other stuff. But if I decide to cast circle before doing something small or quick, like a little piece of magic or creating a magical item, I typically focus on inviting the elements into my space, and I kind of wrap that into creating sacred space. That process of creating sacred space and creating an energetic sphere all around you that is a container for the energy that you plan to raise. And so that might be one thing, is if you are planning to raise energy, perhaps you want to cast a circle because it is a container for that energy. If you are not going to be raising energy in whatever the thing is that you're doing, then it's not needed for that reason. But maybe you still want to cast a circle because it is a mindful space that helps you remember that you are stepping away from the rest of your daily worries and problems and concerns right now, and now you're focusing on this task. So for some people, it can be a mental and emotional cue that, okay, now we're stepping into this space that is reserved for this task. And that can be a really powerful reason to use a circle as well. When I talk about casting a circle as well, if I'm doing it small, if you're familiar with the concept of shielding, putting up an energetic shield around you to protect yourself from various things, to help you maintain a certain sense of calm or courage or whatever the case may be for your day. I think of those as really similar concepts, because to me, shielding is like essentially casting a circle around your person. It's a personal circle. And when you cast a circle for ritual, if you're a solitary, it's still pretty much just a personal circle. So it's very similar to shielding. If you are casting a circle in a group context, then that shield or that container is going around the entire group or around the entire space, depending on how you do it. When I cast circle for just something small, I might just cast the circle around my immediate space. At the most basic, I invite the elements into my space. I tend to turn to each one of them physically, turn my body facing each of those directions, and I welcome them, and above and below, and center, and that's my very quick version. That has been essentially the entire circle casting process in some rituals that I have participated in community. So that is definitely one way of doing it. And it's a sort of quick way that I tend to use a lot at home when it's just me. When I was in college, I was specifically exploring what it felt like casting circle in my personal space at different phases of the moon. I was trying different things like sitting still in a chair like I am now, and turning not my entire physical body, but turning my awareness to the different directions and probably gesturing to them with my hands, as I tend to do, like I am demonstrating now. And so that is one way that I have done a circle while seated, not having to move my entire body around. But then I also played around with standing up and standing basically rooted in the same spot, but physically turning my entire body around in the circle to face the directions. And then I also played with actually walking my entire person all around the edges of the space. So physically walking that circle boundary 3 times. And then when I take up the circle at the end to finish my ritual or whatever I'm doing, my working, I would walk that the opposite direction. So I tested out all of those 3 different things. And what I've discovered is that I mainly prefer standing and physically turning my body around to face the directions. That is my preference. But I will do the seated and just moving my awareness around if that is more convenient. But I also like doing the walk around for specific things. So if it feels like a really big ritual or something like that, then I like to do the full walk around. But otherwise, I don't tend to do the full walk. Also, when I've done rituals in community with larger groups of people, we pretty much never do the walk around. There likely will be a time sometime during the ritual, like when we're raising energy, that we dance or run around the circle. But for the actual casting, we don't tend to move from our spot. It tends to be moving our body around, moving our awareness, and projecting that energy, sending that energy out. And so in the reclaiming tradition community that I'm a part of, we cast circle all together. So whether there are 5 people standing in the circle or 15 or 50, we all participate in simultaneously casting that circle together, sending the energy to the boundaries of the space and strengthening it. Everyone does it, as opposed to other traditions, groups that I have observed. Either I've been a guest at them or in public ritual at events. Other groups tend to do it where a couple of people are in charge of casting the circle and everyone else kind of politely observes and maybe adds their energy to it, but they're not doing the actions. They're not doing maybe it is the walking around or whatever. And that makes sense sometimes, in a really large group. In certain rituals that I've attended, we have also observed I don't want to say tradition just because we use the word tradition to mean so many different things when we're talking about this kind of stuff. So what do I want to say? We have observed the practice of the high priestess and any sort of upper level initiates start out in the ritual space and they are present while the high priestess is casting the circle, and everyone else, so like first degrees, neophytes, or any guests from outside the tradition, such as myself, that's always been the case for me. I'm being a guest in those situations. We actually wait outside the ritual space. And then the circle is cast, a door is cut, and then the rest of us who were waiting outside are then welcomed in to that circle, which has already been established without us being in it. So that's a little different. Depending on what your experiences have been, what groups or traditions you have been a part of or have been a guest to, or depending on what books you've read, that might actually be more familiar to some people who are listening to this or watching this video. So that is something that I have been part of, that I have witnessed. That is a specific practice of many traditions. But then the way that I do it, of course, I mainly work as a solitary. So it's just me. So I am the one casting the circle, and I cast it around myself. I don't cast it like outside and then step into it or anything. And of course, that's not what they're doing either. The high priestess and the other initiates are in the circle as it's being cast. And when I'm in a collaborative group, community, ritual thing, we all do it together. So we're casting the space around all of us, and we're all there, and we're all participating. I absolutely respect and appreciate that I've gotten to observe the other ways that people do it, because I'm fascinated sort of by the idea that casting circle can be done so many ways. So I really appreciate my friends who are really practicing very traditional forms of witchcraft, who are, coven based and lineage based and initiatory and all of that, who have invited me to rituals where they can have guests. And I know that in those cases, there are certain things that are not done in their rituals when guests are present. There are certain things that are only reserved for the initiates of that tradition. And I just appreciate any little bit that I get to observe. So I really like that I've gotten to see what that's like and gotten to feel what that's like. And it's not like it felt bad, it was just different. And it's obviously not how I do things myself. I don't work in a coven. And then when we have our group processes, I really like doing it all together. But anyway, a little while ago, I was writing something, and I had mentioned, as I always do when I'm talking about something that I might do, there are a million ways to do everything. So I'm talking about, this is the way I do it, and this is the way this tradition does it, and this is the way this other tradition does it that I have gotten to see, right? Even I'm doing it in this video. But I was writing about that, about something like, it wasn't circle casting, but it was like how I make offerings or something like that. And I was listing several different options. And someone gave me feedback that said, don't, for the purposes of this, like in order to keep it short, don't bother telling everyone all of the other options out there of what other people do. Just focus on what you do. And I was like, I think you misunderstand. Everything that I said is something that I do. I don't do things the exact same way every time. So that is something that has been very true in reclaiming rituals that I've been a part of, and workshops and process meetings and everything. Everything is done in sacred space. We cast circle and invoke the elements and all of that for everything. And there is sort of the way that I do it for myself, acknowledging the elements and above and below and center. That is a very basic sort of format that we do tend to use a lot. And I have seen that version repeated many times. And it's also basically what we did at witch camp most of the time. But I've also learned many other techniques for casting circle that I love. And they don't all make sense for a solitary practitioner. So they're not necessarily things that I've been able to translate to my personal practice. And that's why I tend to default back to that welcoming the elements, inviting the elements. But in group ritual, there have been many ways that I have been part of casting circle, and I love all of them. And I just love that, whoever, it could be one person volunteers to cast the circle and they show us a new technique for doing it, or it could be a few people and one person is going to welcome air, someone else is going to welcome fire, water, earth, etc. But I just want to give you a couple ideas of some of the other versions of casting circle that I've seen and been a part of that I really like, just, again, to give you an idea that there are some other options out there, and these are other things that I would do. We don't do things the same way every time, and it will depend on what we're doing and kind of what we want the vibe to be. Maybe it depends on how many people there are, because some things really take a longer time, so they make more sense with smaller groups, and so on. So it's always going to depend. But one thing that comes to my mind as an example that many people might be familiar with is the movie Practical Magic with Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman. Toward the end of the film, sort of in the big, dramatic climax scene, it's an older movie and it's based on a book, so really spoilers shouldn't matter, but I will respect that some people really care about spoilers. So if you haven't seen it yet, I won't reveal exactly what the scene is about, but I do want to talk about how they cast their circle. So a bunch of women show up at the house. Everyone has been asked to bring a broom, and they all get together, like when they're ready to create the circle, they are creating a container around something in the center, that the women are outside of the circle, but they are also the circle. Like, they are holding the boundary of the circle. They're not really inside it because it's meant to be a container for something else, but neither are they really outside of it. They're not separate from it. They are it. So they bring their brooms, everyone's holding their broom, and they hold it out and touch the brooms together so that the brooms are actually forming the shape, and the women are hanging on to them, and they've got their hands sort of at the intersection of two brooms. So they're all holding these brooms together, and then there's a chant, and that's how they cast the circle. And they're raising energy at the same time. And then later we see that they've, without taking them apart, they've lowered the brooms to lay on the floor of the room in that circle shape. So that's one example of a different way that it could be done. I've also been in circles where we cast circle by whoever is starting it centers themselves. And so let's say you're to my left, centers themselves, and then turns to the person next to them and stares deeply into their eyes, and you take a couple of breaths or whatever. And then when you feel like it's done, there's either, a nod or a slight bow or just a thank you for being here or whatever. Maybe there is something verbalized. Maybe it's just the acknowledgement silently. And then you would turn to the person on the other side of you and do the same thing. And that follows around the circle until the last person turns back to the person who started it, looks into their eyes, has that moment. And so there is an individual moment of connection between everyone standing around the circle, and then it comes back. Very similarly, there was another version of this that we did. I don't remember who led it or who taught it, but it was very similar in that it started with one person. We were all holding hands, and then whoever was going to start turned to the person next to them, and they're holding your hand, right? And they would bring your hand with theirs up to their heart to center themselves, and then you would take your hand and move their hand over to your chest. So everywhere, so if it were me doing it, the person next to me would take my hand to their heart, and then I would take their hand over with mine to my heart, and then we back to center, and then I'd turn to the next person, bring their hand with mine to my heart, and then give them my hand going with theirs to their heart. So it was a very similar, a moment of connection between each person all around the circle, but with moving our hands over our heart instead of while we're all holding hands the entire circle, rather than just looking into each other's eyes. So those are two versions that I love. How else have we cast circle? Sometimes you just hold hands, raise them up. Maybe there's a chant, maybe not. Sometimes it's much more musical. Sometimes it's chanting and droning and all kinds of things. But I think those have been some of my favorite small group community circle casting moments, have been those ones where it's like we're all casting it together, but you can you watch it slowly move around the circle as everyone is having that small moment of connection. So I really like those, but as you can see, that doesn't really translate so well to a solitary practice. So if I wanted to do something like that for myself, I could still do my hands to my heart. I could look at myself in a mirror if I wanted to, or I could just close my eyes and have that inner moment of connection. And then when I feel that I am there, acknowledge the circle or whatever. But like when I just did that, I have to visualize the circle forming around me as I do that. And so maybe, Samhain's coming up here in the Northern Hemisphere. Maybe something we do at that point is we actually envision ourselves standing with a circle of our ancestors, whether it's our blood ancestors or chosen family or spiritual lineage. If we envision ourselves as being surrounded by them and looking across the circle and seeing them all look back at us, maybe that is, that's one way of sort of translating that into what could be a solitary, as in I am the only living human being physically in the room. That's one way of maybe translating it to looking around at all of those guardian spirits or ancestors or whoever you have invited and brought with you to your circle. Other than that, I welcome the elements to my space. That's mostly how I do it. So yeah, do you cast a circle in your practice? Why do you cast a circle? Why do you not? Does it depend on what you're doing? For me, it definitely does. And also, depending on the tradition or the practices that we are reading about or observing or witnessing, circles might be cast, but they might be being cast for different reasons. So like I said with the Practical Magic movie example, they were casting a circle to contain something else, not themselves. So that is something that certain practices, certain practitioners do. But what I think a lot of us are doing is casting the circle around ourselves. And it might be for a feeling of protection. It might be for that, like I said, that mental and emotional cue that we are stepping into a space that is reserved for this task rather than all of the daily worries. Or, as it is in most of the circles that I cast, the reason we're casting the circle is as a container for energy, because we are trying to hold in the energy into a smaller space rather than letting it kind of go out and spread everywhere else into our environment. We want to be holding it in this space until we've got it built up to such a point that it's ready to burst. If it were a bubble, it would be ready to pop. And then we consciously release it and let it go so that it shoots off very focused toward our goal instead of just kind of seeping slowly away the entire time. So the number one reason that I cast circle, if I'm casting it, is as a container for energy. The number two reason is for the just sort of designating it as, okay, now I am doing something that is part of my spiritual and religious path now, not because I think that anything outside the circle is somehow not sacred, because I believe that everything is sacred and magic is in everything and is everywhere and everything has energy. So that explanation wouldn't make sense for me, that, oh, what's in this is sacred and everything else is not. No, because everything is sacred. So it's more about just creating that smaller personal space where you can feel safe, you can feel comfortable doing the things that you're going to do, creating that sort of place where you can really focus. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for watching and or listening to this video. I will see you next time. And until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.